Steinhubl. That was mind-boggling to say the least. I don't know about others, but I, for one, have a mixed feeling of trepidation, of anxiety, of something, like a child given a toy, don't know how to look forward to it, how the future holds for us. So it's a lot of mixed feelings. So we've stepped onto a threshold of a new era in medicine, and hopefully makes life easy for all of us. As we speak, my team tells me there were 1,300 people who have logged on for our Facebook live streaming page, and that's wonderful to hear. Can I have Meena on stage too? And I'll throw the stage open for questions. I'm sure you'll have a lot of questions, a lot of clarifications perhaps to seek from Meena as a leading home care health provider, and from Dr. Steinhubl, who has opened the doors for this revolutionary path of medicine. To set the ball rolling, perhaps I will ask a question myself. Physicians are traditionally and historically very, very resistant to change. How does this new digital M-health technologies impact the practice of medicine? There is this sacrosanct doctor-patient relationship we talk about all the time. How will that be impacted? And coming to a more basic level, would physicians be, or hospitals be, threatened with the feeling that we have less footfalls in future? Maybe it'll impact our revenue, maybe things are going to be taken away from us, maybe that kind of a feeling. What's your take on that, Dr. Steinhubl?
I think that there's a lot of really legitimate reasons to feel that way, because this is, and just realize as I'm talking about the U.S. healthcare system, because that's what I'm familiar with. We've really developed in the U.S. this really artificially built system that is leading to physicians being unhappy. So in the U.S., 80% of physicians describe their morale as poor to very poor, and 2/3 would not recommend that a young adult go into the medical profession, which is really disheartening for the physicians in the audience. I think it's the greatest. You're getting paid to help people. It's a wonderful field. So we've created this environment that's dissatisfying for the majority of physicians, and I think it's because we've made it impossible to practice for the reasons we went into medicine. We rarely get to spend time with our patients. And when we do, and in fact this has been studied, for 1 out of every 2 patients a primary care doctor sees in the U.S., the doctor has a question about the right way to treat the patient that they don't have time to look up. So they just do what they have always done in the past. But when you formally question them, they say, yeah, I wasn't sure of what the right medicine was, what the right recommended medicine, what the right dose was, and I just kind of went with it. And so I think a lot of doctors end up going home at the end of the day feeling like they've kind of just survived, and that's it. They don't go home with that satisfaction. On the other hand, I know from either both personal experience and then having many conversations with doctors, the last thing any of them are open to is like, hey, I have a solution for you. We're going to fix all that, and we're going to give everybody sensor technologies, and we're going to, because all they picture is a flood of data coming in at them, and that they already don't have enough time to do what they're supposed to do, and suddenly they're supposed to look at all this sensor data and make sense of it. So I think it's really incumbent upon us, and us being the disruptors. I get to do it from a research standpoint. Meena gets to do it from a true implementation standpoint, is to recognize that, and we have to realize we have to build the model and show that it can work in a way that actually makes healthcare more satisfying to the physician. It's more satisfying to the patient, that doctor-patient relationship is still there, that trust is still there, because when you do see your doctor, you actually spend quality time with them. When the doctor sees the patient, they get to spend quality time with the patient because they have that time, because they're not doing algorithmic medicine. They're not catching up on what happened the last 4 months in that individual's life, because they've known. They've known, and they've had people who are trained to do that, who can look at that and stay on top of things. So it's very easy for me to picture what it's going to be like, let's say 3 years, 4 years, 5 years from now. Getting there, I know, will be very, very messy, certainly in the United States. And I think it's going to be dependent on somebody setting the example as a disruptor And it's happening a little bit in virtual care, where doctors initially were very hesitant, but now there's a stream of doctors going in to want to do that kind of care on a virtual platform because they can have a schedule that is under their control. They can spend as much time as they want talking to the patients or as little time as they want, and they feel like they're making a difference.
Okay, there's a question at the back, please. A microphone there.
Hello, I'm Dr. Umesh here. I'm a senior consultant in Fortis, as well as I own a hospital. See, as a owner of the hospital, I always worry about the income for the service what I provide. Are these gadgets are going to affect my income? This question one. Second thing, as a physician, practicing physician, more than 50% of now the disease trend is entirely different. So more than 50% of the patients who visit to a physician are not really organic. So they are most of the time they are psychosomatic. And all these gadgets, they provide only the data and more so of related to cardiac or whatever it is. So are we going to manage those patients, more than 50% of the patients who are having a psychosomatic illness, who really require interaction with the physician, who really require somebody who can understand their emotions?
Right.
Okay. So what's your comment on this?
Yeah, so they're both really good points, and so again, I'm going to try to protect myself and answer from a U.S. standpoint because that's what I understand. It definitely, if nothing changed in the U.S. right now, so right now we're very fee-for-service, and which is a problem. So I'm a cardiologist, and we abuse that more than any other group out there, and I don't say that lightly, but there have been many studies of how many people have no indication for a heart catheterization but have a heart catheterization, how many people have get stents with no indications for doing that. And yes, so if that's the way, if you're a U.S. physician that makes your income by doing procedures, and if nothing else changed and it remained fee-for-service, that would affect incomes. But the whole thing that's driving this change, again, in the U.S., is that the biggest reimburser of doctors in the country, the government, has said by 2018, no more fee-for-service in half of all of our patients. Has to be value-based care. So you do whatever the heck you want. You want to treat stable angina with stents and everything? That's great. We're going to pay you this set amount of money, and you can do what you want with it, but it's up to you to take care of the patient with that money. And then by 2019, it has to be 80%, and the idea would be by 2020, it would be 100% value-based reimbursement and no longer fee-for-service. So that in and of itself is going to be a huge change. At Scripps, we have a lot of echo techs, a lot of nuclear techs, a lot of interventional cardiologists, a lot of electrophysiologists who are going to probably be a lot less busy, and they get paid right now based on how many procedures they do. So that's going to be a very, very difficult transition. But again, the problem is in the U.S., it's not a minor problem. We're on a trajectory to completely bankrupt the U.S. budget by 2050 if we come purely on healthcare costs unless we do something about it. So it has to be something big. It can't be a tweak. So ideally, what I think is it shouldn't affect income because things would change. So right now, doctors in the U.S. don't get paid to talk to a patient. So you're leading into your second question, the psychosomatic patient. Well, in cardiology, the psychosomatic patient, the easiest and most lucrative way to treat them is to put them on a treadmill or even do a heart cath or do an echo, and they show them pictures, and it's reassuring. It's often not the right thing to do, but it's certainly the quickest thing to do to explain why their chest pain is very atypical. There's almost no way it can be angina, and not to worry about it. But you're not paid to spend time, 45 minutes, to talk to a patient and to do that. And that has to change. So there has to be a trade-off where we start getting paid. So let's talk about non-proceduralist doctors, not cardiologists. But the non-proceduralists have to start getting paid to be educators and diagnosticians. And really, why else do you go to medical school for 4 years and residency for 3 years and fellowship for a few years after that? Why do you learn pharmacy and anatomy and microbiology and physiology Is it, just to spend 5 minutes with the patient? Or is it really to kind of to understand how everything interacts with each other and to be able to explain that to people who don't have the training that you have? And in a way, that's what what my boss, Eric Topol, and friend, has called this Gutenberg moment, where smartphones and internet connectivity have educated our patients where they may not need us to do some of the simple stuff anymore. And they need us, though, to be that synthesizer, that diagnostician, that educator. But anyway, that's a very long and I know unsatisfying answer, because it's a very, very difficult. But I think in the long run, in my happy world, we'll end up right-sizing reimbursement, where doctors will once again get paid to do what actually they want to do, I think, or most of them want to do, is spend time with their patients and feel like they're playing a curative role. And at the same time, that'll help. Maybe, the AliveCore, the EKG device, the average owner of an AliveCore takes their EKG 24 times a month. I would have, until I heard that, I would have never guessed that. I would have guessed somebody buys an AliveCore and maybe takes an EKG once every 3 months or once every 6 months or something. 24 times a month, that's almost once a day somebody's worried enough about what's happening to their heart to be able to check an EKG. And so we don't know, but maybe in those people who are otherwise the worried well, that they're being reassured by having that information themselves.
The question at the back.
Hi, Steve. This is Rama. I belong to a digital health company called SmartRx. This question is more about a portion of his and his question combined. It's more in terms of adoption, right? If you think of chronic care management in US, it was able to get adopted more to Medicare patients or Medicare customers because of the driving force, where they have been paid $42 between a month of a visit, right? So from your perspective, I'm sure we follow Western countries. We are still 1 or 2 steps way behind in terms of government driving something for us in that perspective, right? So according to you, how much of that government driving or a driving force is really needed to enforce some of these great transforming disruptive health technology? Just wanted to get your perspective on that.
Yeah, I think it's hugely important. I think the reason there are literally thousands of engineers and engineering departments at universities working on wearable sensors is because they recognize there's a $4 trillion healthcare market in the United States that is ripe for disruption, that the government is pushing that, and with changes. And so it's not motivating doctors nearly as much, but it is motivating the people developing the technology that will make it happen. I'm a firm believer in the United States, it's not going to be healthcare systems that disrupt healthcare. It's going to be another outside group with many potential options, but the Amazon of healthcare, which may actually end up being Amazon, that really just can change the way we provide care. But none of that would happen. Amazon, Walgreens, and other big consumer-facing companies wouldn't be looking at it if it weren't for the $42 a month reimbursement for chronic condition management and recognizing, hey, we can get a small bit of this $4 trillion pot and do really, really well.
Can I just add a little snippet here? I've been in conversation with some of the big insurance companies here, and they too are looking at this very seriously to see if they should include good compliance to chronic disease management to renewal premium. So the more that gets started, then some of these devices and other practices will become important.
Meena, adding to that, pardon me? Yes. No, what about medical devices in terms of home health care? Don't you think they go hand in hand?
Yeah.
What's your impression? I'd like to get Meena's impression on that. How have you implemented that, and where is the way forward for us?
Absolutely. So the only way that it's possible to provide really comprehensive ongoing care of patients is by using technology. And technology at the consumer end, at the patient end, something which they can use to capture data that the medical team can look at on a regular basis and intervene at the right moments is the only way this can be done. Otherwise, the measurements and the care gets limited to only those times when somebody goes and visits, which can never be adequate. And this is specifically so as more and more people with chronic diseases need to be managed more closely. There has to be a component of self-care, which is combined with the care that gets provided by people like us. And that's where we are seeing a lot of usage of technology.
Doctor?
Yeah, Dr. Maya, just comment on what you had started at the question, whether it's going to decrease the number of patients which are coming to us and therefore decrease the revenue. Well, if you, Steve has been talking about the US aspect, I'll talk about the Indian aspect. Okay, for us there is a gap between, a huge gap between the clinical medicine and the digital medicine. It's not as close as it is in US. So first, that gap has to be closed to decrease the number of patients coming to us. We still go on a face-to-face visit, and Indians prefer a digital visit, or because we're not exposed to that kind of environment yet. Okay, that is the first point. The second point of the revenue coming down. As we go upscale the digitization, the revenue streams, there are a number of revenue streams which are coming up because you're monitoring everything. So you can link your revenue to the streams that you're providing. You understand?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, you're having about 14 parameters to monitor, right from sleep, respiratory rate, oxygen analysis. So you could charge for each one of them. So obviously, what will happen is when this gap gets closed down, that is between the clinical medicine and the digital medicine, I don't think there is going to be a difference in part of the revenue system, unless it is government sponsored. For the private people, there's still a chance of growing their revenue. Okay, as in US, it is all government sponsored. Maybe there are few. There are private clinics, of course, it is. But if it is wholly government sponsored, then there is no effect on the revenue.
So in effect, what you're saying is it should not impact you too much, provided we embrace digital technology, right?
Yes, and we make use of, we know to make use of the streams as a revenue.
Okay, got it. Now, one more question from my side, Steve. Now, we're talking about so many equipment. Now, what do you think checks and balances in this area are?
So that's a huge unmet need, and it's very poorly, the FDA in the United States recognizes that. And I'll give an example. There was an app that was available as one of the most popular healthcare related apps on the smartphone, and what it advertised itself as a blood pressure app. And the way it worked is you were to hold your phone against your chest and put your finger on the lens, and there's some science where it kind of makes sense, but anyway, they said it measured your blood pressure. And then there was testimonies on the page, and people had said, I was on 4 blood pressure medicines, and my blood pressure was still 170/90, and I stopped, but with your device, it's great because my blood pressure is always 120/80, and I stopped all my medicines, and everything's great. And it was found out to be like a random number generator and just do. But it avoided FDA oversight because in small print on the bottom, it said for entertainment purposes only. So, so here's a because what could be more entertaining than measuring your blood pressure? But they got away, so they were within the confines of the law. So there are other devices. There's an acne treatment that uses the light on your flash, on your smartphone to treat acne, and other things that eventually get shut down for other reasons. So that's a long kind of non-answer because but it's recognized as a problem. Unfortunately, there are digital snake oil salesmen out there. They're going to try to rip off people and do dangerous things, and I think it's bad for the whole field. And we're just trying to address it. As a researcher, we think anything that's used, certainly in the Precision Medicine Initiative, the technologies we're using in that are all going to have some level of validation in the population that's similar to the population that'll be used. And we're hoping as there's more and more incorporation of those technologies, that will become just standard.
There's always a guy ready to make a fast buck.
Yeah, in fact, the FDA, like Steve had shown the slide, out of 1,65,000, only 0.2%. That's the FDA report, by the way.
0.02%.
Of the health apps were actually working.
Yeah.
Were actually working. So, you know, it's more fancy, and the caution is always read the last line.
Yeah.
There's many people to get on to the fast buck bandwagon. Ravi?
Yeah, good evening. The two questions. One is for example, currently the Swan GANs has been replaced by the transesophageal Doppler monitoring, especially in patients with high risk surgery, whether it's cardiac or GI surgery, whatever. Is there anything that is happening which, because transesophageal Doppler is also very invasive monitoring,
Yeah.
and the thing is, because I think it educates the anesthetist to give less fluids and give you data which is almost real time,
Yeah.
so that patients can be monitored what is called as the goal directed therapy. So is there any device which is kind of replacing that? Second thing is, what are the legal, currently we are not yet reached a stage where legal aspects come into it.
Right.
Are there any legal kind of, for example, you depend on an app and advise something and something happens,
Yeah.
and you cannot say the app was wrong or whatever.
Right.
So how do you address that?
Yeah, so the legal question is almost as good as the regulatory question, and so at least again, and I apologize. This in the U.S. What's legal is based on, is it consistent with your regional standard of care, and so if you're totally dependent on an app today, and a lawyer would check with the community and say, well, no one else uses that, and you made a mistake, you would be responsible. Maybe 10 years from now, if the majority of doctors around you are using apps or sensors and you're not, and you miss something, then you're legally responsible for doing that, and it's a crappy situation, and there's no way around it. So it's kind of like you have to hit it right at the right spot. I mean, clearly, if you're using a app or a sensor in an FDA regulated manner, then you're somewhat protected, but at least in the U.S. legal system, anything can happen in doing that.
Peer-to-peer pressure.
Yeah, well, in a way that is, and you have to, have the evidence, and so it's this, it's a little annoying transition. The other question, like, yeah, the first part, which I know.
Device.
So on the transesophageal echo and replacing that, nothing I'm aware of around that. Now, one of the nice uses of the handheld echo, and at least looking at fluid status, in fact, so we do a pretty good number of studies, and our hospitalists in our hospital use a lot of handheld ultrasound, and one of the most common uses is to determine fluid status of a patient by looking at the inferior vena cava and determining if it's collapsed or if it's plump, and looks like the pressure's elevated. And so I think that's one of the kind of, if we had that as a common part of our tool chest of diagnostic devices, where you could, that be a standard treatment, you could use it for that. But someday we'll get there on the transesophageal.
Yeah.
After that.
Yeah. Good evening, Dr. Steve. I think so. Your presentation was really awesome and mind-boggling. It is one of the seminars where I've been, and it has really tickled my mind to think, being a technologist and a service provider. So I really say it's kudos to you for your presentation.
Thank you.
And I know India is pretty much a diabetic country, and diabetes is a big killer in India. And myself, I'm a diabetic. So with respect to your genomic care or genomic treatment, was very interesting for me. In terms, so I really would like to see that there's a root cause treatment for the diabetic issue, rather than just being a symptomatic treatment, as you're aptly highlighted in your chart. So I wanted to know by when could this, you could come out with a genomic solution that patients could be treated appropriately and be rid of this disease, because it's not only that it's your sugar, but it impacts all your organs, so it could lead to possibly multi-organ failure. So I want to know how they can be monitored and how could your genomic
Yeah.
treatment be of use? Thank you so much.
Sure. And you bring up another good point. In some people with diabetes, it tremendously affects their kidneys, their eyesight, their vasculature, and others it doesn't. We don't know why that is. So that's this other individualized different that we don't know. So so I don't have a good answer. The only good, in quotes good, is that because diabetes is so epidemic, really, in so many countries, that there's a tremendous amount of research ongoing. And I didn't include on the slide, I used to in an earlier version of it, not only the human genomic implications, but your microbiome, which is another thing that when I was in medical school, you never even thought of. I mean, what the heck's a microbiome? But now we think that can affect the risk of diabetes, our response to different foods that we eat, and that may hold a key for some people also in doing that. So I think the encouraging thing is there's a lot of studies ongoing to look at the variation in the genomic risk factors in response to therapies. There's the same thing looking at the microbiome. Just I think today or yesterday, Google's been working with one of the earliest continuous glucose monitoring companies called Dexcom that's in San Diego on a continuous glucose monitor that's becoming closer and closer to being non-invasive. And that's just going to be a matter of time where it's going to be much easier. And I think that too will help us refine treatments. So I still think we're a ways to go, but there is probably more, I think, so than any other condition. There's more people working on it, and so I think we're going to learn a lot every year.
Getting pretty late, so Vivek,
Yes,
your question will be the last.
Okay, I'm always the
Good.
the showstopper.
It's called the effect, yes.
Okay. So firstly, Dr. Steven, I completely believe that disruptive technology is going to change the way in which we practice healthcare. No question about it. Either we adapt to it or the healthcare is going to throw us out. Now, what's going to happen to the hospitals?
Adapt or perish.
Yeah, they have to adapt or perish. That's one. Yeah. But it's going to happen in steps. First thing to go will be diagnostics, then would be the medical aspect, and probably last would be the surgical part, which would come by maybe 50 years from now. Yeah. So I can see that in my medical part of the practice, I would say at this point of time, 80% is non-face-to-face, telephone, Skype, etc. So I can see that's happening, and I can see, as he pointed out, if you can figure out how to get a revenue stream, you can make it successful. It's not easy, but you can. Yeah. Second, I think that there's going to be a huge role for companies like Portea. For example, there's so many devices that I don't know, but I would expect that company, the Google of healthcare, I think my prediction, Portea, the Google of healthcare, would be able to do the research and give me the data I need, which is usable. Yeah. So aggregators are going to come in and they're going to change the way in which we can practice, as long as we can't expect an individual to do all this. So if those platforms are created, there will be challenges which we are, and India is actually fairly quick on this because we don't have the regulatory issues as much as you have. Yeah. We don't have insurance companies controlling the systems as you have. Right. So we don't have to have licenses in every state to practice, etc. So we have a huge advantage, huge opportunity. Yeah. But the challenge is lying in the digital medicine, I believe, is going to be in the interoperability, the IoT, which would have to be taken by aggregators. And and the knowledge of the doctor is going to be what we're going to, the knowledge of the physician is, they will figure out how do you reimburse them for their knowledge. So if that, you should know how to use the knowledge. And traditional medicine is definitely going to change.
Vivek,
so
Meena and I are very closely listening to it. We'll take that cue. Yeah. All right?
Yeah. No, I mean, I can see that, I can see things happening right here. So and lastly, out of interest, I want to know Translational Science Institute. Yeah. So do you develop devices? Do you aggregate? Do you study devices? Or what is it? And apart from the genomic part, which I understand is just separate, what exactly does that mean to us as doctors and physicians?
So first of all, great comments. And then first, the translational part of it. So what we do is we try to use digital technologies to address clinical problems. And so for that, we don't develop any devices, but we have the luxury, so we're only a 50-person organization. And the digital medicine arm has a few clinical trialists, several behavioral scientists, several data scientists, and then the support around that. And so we have the ability to work with, we think, the best of the best and bring any solution in to digital solution. And so we feel one of our jobs is, like you said, to be aware of all the digital technologies out there, what their state of evidence is, and their applicability to the problem. But it's really our focus is translating these, in this case for the digital technologies, the work of the biomedical engineers who develop them into clinical practice. So it's really showing what the benefits are of it. It's the world's greatest job.
Very blunt question. What is your interest in India?
Well, so that kind of leads to my comment I was going to say on what you said. So I believe, very strongly believe, that India is better positioned to show the rest of the world how this works. So for us in the US, we have to do, almost all the work we do is outside healthcare systems because it's disruptive. In India, you already have consumerism in healthcare. You, without kind of knowing it's different, are already developing things that will bring customers to you, healthcare customers to you. So you have that. We're just starting to get that in the United States as our copay is going up, where people are starting to shop around. The other thing you have is a very technology savvy population, so that you have a much higher level of comfort with using technologies and feeling comfortable and knowing and how to do that. And then the last thing you have that others is you have populations that in the very rural settings that digital technology isn't replacing a brick and mortar facility. It has the ability to be the only healthcare provision there. And for almost all disruptive technologies, ignoring healthcare, they almost always start in areas where they are the only solution, and then they become refined there, and then they become expanded to places in the middle class, and then finally in the upper class societies. And so I think that in India, that you have the environment to do things that we don't have in the United States. And in fact, I think what Portea is doing is a great example of that already, and especially the fact that they've been able to do it in 3 years period of time shows that in a very consumer-centric focus of care, if you kind of pay attention to what it is the healthcare consumer, the patient, really wants and needs, and you provide that for them, you can be very successful. And I'm convinced that digital technologies can do that, with all the caveats that it's very difficult, that we have a lot to learn and to do that. So in my mind, there's no place better to be than in India to do this.
Okay, I think the very fact that we are 9:30 and people still want to ask questions mean that Steve has made a tremendous impact on our thinking, a lot of unopened doors open today, a lot of food for thought. With that positive note, I think I'll close the evening. And before that, can I have Meena giving a token of our gratitude for having come all this way to give us this particular lecture, Dr. Steven Steinhubl. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's all my pleasure.
I want Monica to come up here because they say that for a successful person, I won't tell you more, but I think you've been the inspiration. And
Yay.
Monica Steinhubl, ladies and gentlemen, Meena. Thank you very much, ma'am. And the person who put the whole thing together, Mr. Boba Venkatadri, would you please come here? Mr. Boba is like I said earlier, is a partner in the Venture East. It's a VC fund management firm, and they've also invested in our company. So we're very happy to say thank you to you and Meena to do the honors. I also take this opportunity to invite all of you for dinner, but whole lot of dignitaries off the stage too. Thank you very much for being here. In spite of the delayed start and the prolonged discussion, I can see the enthusiasm in all of you. I would also like to thank our event managers, Aman and Paniel Jayant for putting this program together. And last but not the least, my team at Portea who've worked to put this whole thing together. Kavita and her team with the marketing department, Kaustav, Famous, Reshma, Yashu and Sridevi. Kaushik and Aditi from the sales team, and Brian, of course, doing a lot of work for the PR section. Thank you very much for everything, ladies and gentlemen. We'll adjourn for dinner now. Thank you very much.